I'm Jenni Carlson.
I'm Barry Trammell. Welcome to the Jenni and Berry Show.
But before we get to that, we want to say thanks to these sponsors for supporting the Jenni and Berry Show. The Oklahoma Ford Dealers Association, MidFirst Bank, Next Gen Roofing, Two Fellas Movers, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, 988, Oklahoma's Mental Health Lifeline. Drive into your best in Oklahoma Ford dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of trucks and SUVs. Ford is the best in Oklahoma. And let's face it, a box of pizza and a case of beer just don't work like they used to when you're moving. Nobody wants to help you. But we know two fellas who love moving. At Two Fellas Moving Company, we offer free, no-strings quotes for your move. With more than 20 years experience, we've pretty much moved it all. Our services don't end at moving either. Need to do some remodeling or spring cleaning? We have you covered with dumpster rentals and junk haul services. Remember, all the quotes are free and there are no strings attached. So if you're moving in Oklahoma, make sure to call the fellas. Visit twofellas.com for your free quote today. All right, Barry, Vegas odds makers, they were a little bit busy last week with the Super Bowl, but they took some time to put out their odds for win totals. And as you mentioned, OU OSU 7.5 is kind of where they have fallen. That seems kind of low. Does it feel low to you?
Well, it feels low to me. When OU first came out at 6.5, I think everybody in the state was stunned. But one of the problems is when you look at OU's schedule and you realize, while you see 6.5 or even 7.5, you think, well, take the over.
Yeah.
If you go through the schedule, you think, well, I think so, probably so, but not for sure. Sooners
don't you start though with the 4 gimmies? Their non-conference games are 4 easy wins, Barry.
Yeah, easiest non-conference schedule in OU football history, probably. Temple, Tulane, Houston, Maine. 2 schools from the northeast corner of America, and 2 schools from the Gulf Coast who 12 months ago were mid-majors. One of them has moved up to the Big 12. So easy non-con. But you get into that SEC schedule, and there are not a lot of automatic victories. South Carolina in Norman, yes. Outside of that, there's not even a win you can say would take a massive upset for OU to lose.
Yeah.
When you're looking at Tennessee coming to town, going to Auburn, going to Missouri, going to Ole Miss, game after game after game, you think, well, OU could win, maybe even OU should win, but you don't know that OU will win.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And, even a team like Missouri, which if we were sitting here a year ago and Missouri's on Oklahoma's schedule, you probably think, well, there's a win. I mean, if Oklahoma had played like they had played this last year, but then Missouri has a great season last year, and suddenly going to Columbia, it might be a game that Oklahoma wins by double digits, but you could see Missouri winning that game too. I mean, I think you're right, Barry, and especially, the way that season finishes out, man, it's a slobber knocker for the Sooners. So if they don't get some wins that are of the toss-up variety early in their SEC schedule, it's going to be really hard to finish strong. I mean, they could. Now, I'm not saying that it's impossible that they get to 8 wins, but man, it's no easy task when you think of that closing stretch, in the month of November. I mean, I could definitely see 8 being a high watermark. 8-4 you might look at it after the season and think, well, that was a pretty good year for the Sooners, quite honestly.
Yeah, a couple things has happened. One is this. I think America looks upon the Sooners, they're thinking a lot more about 2022.
Yeah.
When Brent Venables' first year goes 6-7.
Yeah.
Than they are 2023 when the Sooners were 10-3 and frankly a lot closer to more wins than more losses.
Right.
So they're putting more stock in that 22 subpar performance. And number 2 is the unbalanced schedule in the SEC. The Sooners drew the short straw. There's no doubt about it. They were given, with OU and Texas being on a neutral field, the Sooners or the Longhorns, one of the two were going to get only 3 home games. It was OU that only got 3 home games. They split up all the opponents. No SEC opponent is going to play both OU and Texas. OU got the tougher side of that.
Yeah.
They're playing Texas got Georgia, but after that, the Sooners get LSU and Alabama. They get the revived Missouri. They got Ole Miss, which everybody's excited about. Meanwhile, they got Tennessee, which people are high on. The Longhorns get Florida. Florida's way down.
Yeah.
They get Texas A&M, which is rebuilding to some degree. Some of the name brands that Texas is playing are in down cycles. So the combination of the bad break on the schedule and just how we look at the last two OU seasons means not a lot of optimism about Oklahoma football right now.
Don't you think there's also maybe some recency bias against what the Sooners did in the Alamo Bowl? They're whether right or wrong, because we know that that's not a totally accurate portrayal of what the 2024 Sooners are going to look like. They're going to lose some guys. They're going to gain some guys. I mean, obviously, that's the cast of characters is not exact, but you look at new quarterback, Jackson Arnold, losing Dillon Gabriel. What's the impact of that? You start to get a sense of that. They lose to an Arizona team that, obviously had one of their best seasons in a long time, but it's still not a name brand. It's still not a team that a lot of people would look at and say, man, there's a really good team. When in reality, that was a pretty good team. But I think nationally, the perception of Oklahoma losing to Arizona, 6 turnovers, new quarterback struggling, I think some of that has to play into this as well. I mean, losing Dillon Gabriel in and of itself, I think was going to be a knock against OU as it relates to oddsmakers. Because let's be honest, Barry, a lot of this has to do with what you were talking about, perception. What do the oddsmakers think the more broad, potentially gambling public thinks about Oklahoma? And the last time people saw the Sooners on the field, it didn't look all that good. So I think that plays into it as well, because, 6.5 felt really low to me, but 7.5, when you think about it from that perspective, it doesn't seem all that crazy.
Yeah. And here's a question. Sooners were up 2 scores, about to go up 3 scores on Arizona before the roof caved in with that fumble and everything else. If OU wins the Alamo Bowl, finishes 11-2, are we having a different conversation? I don't happen to know. I don't know how the American betting public thinks. I don't know how Vegas thinks. That's 2 things out of my wheelhouse. But I do know that the Sooners were close to an 11-2 season. So would that have changed things? I don't know. But when it is a daunting task when you look at that OU schedule. Yeah. You mentioned the November stretch. They go to Missouri. They host Alabama. They go to LSU. And, when things are a little better, no Nick Saban, thanks Nick, but it's going to be a wild ride through this thing. This was a year when OU needed Vanderbilt. That's and Texas got all the scheduling breaks in year one. So and the Sooners have a devil of a time just beating Texas. So I can understand it at 7.5. I think OU will get to 8 wins, but I wouldn't bet it.
So here's the question. Is there a game that you feel like is most important for OU to get over that hump that Vegas sees at 7.5? Do you feel like if they win this game on their schedule, much better chance to get to 8 or more wins next season?
I got 2 for you. One is you need to take care of Tennessee.
Yeah.
In September. If you beat Tennessee, you're off to a 4-0 start.
Yeah. And
things are in pretty good shape, right? I mean, go take your chances with Texas and whoever else. The other one is at Auburn. Auburn is a down program. It's a tradition-rich program. It's a tough place to play program.
It's a place that Alabama almost lost last year.
Alabama always has trouble, almost always has trouble, even when they overmatch Auburn.
Yeah.
But it's a place these Sooners have to go win. If you don't win at Auburn, you really think you're going to win at Oxford. You really think you're going to win at Missouri. You really think you're going to win at LSU. So, to me, those are the 2 games. If you beat Tennessee and Auburn, take your chances with the Rebels, take your chances with the Tigers, take your chances with the Crimson Tide. But to me, that's the 2 key games for having a chance to be an impactful season first year in the SEC.
Yeah, I think the home games are of the utmost importance. Obviously, I doubt that OU's favored when Alabama comes to town, but beating South Carolina, beating Tennessee, winning your home games, to me, that is critical. And then I think what you said about Auburn is right, but to me, it's either Auburn or Missouri. You got to win one of those more winnable road games. And I put it in air quotes because I do know that Missouri is better and Auburn's a tough place to go, but that's going to be Jackson Arnold's first true road game as the starting quarterback for the Sooners. So the bar that's out there for him to cross in that game, it's not uncrossable, but it's definitely, this whatever the first road game for him as the Sooner starting quarterback was going to be difficult. But this is not an easy place to play. But if they can go and win either at Auburn or Missouri, I think that starts to change, how things are looking next season. But man,
I'd say this, Jacko. For OU to be OU, for Oklahoma to be Oklahoma, for the fans to feel like, hey, we are who we say we are, they need to win both those games. I mean, if you lose one of those, one of them might get you over that Vegas 7.5.
Yeah.
But remember, we're doing this 7.5 stuff just because it's fun and interesting and sparked our imagination.
Yep.
Nobody woke up in Norman, Oklahoma, or throughout the great state of Oklahoma today saying, man, hope the Sooners can finish 8-4. Literally nobody feels that way.
No.
So, maybe 9-3. 10-2 would be fabulous. But if you want to be 9-3, if you want to be 10-2, you got to beat both those guys, Auburn and Missouri.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. Yeah, this is, you said earlier, easiest non-conference schedule Oklahoma's ever had. This is the toughest conference schedule they've ever had. So an interesting marriage of schedules for Oklahoma that they're going to have to maneuver next year. Let's pivot over to OSU because they started at 7.5 on the Vegas line win total, and that's where they've stayed. 3 non-conference games that, unlike OU's non-conference games, OSU's are not gimmies. And then the Cowboys have a couple of other Big 12 contenders very early on their schedule. But let's start with that non-conference slate, Barry, because to me, by the end of September, we are going to have a great idea of what this Oklahoma State team is. And it looks a little hairy when you bring in the FCS, national champ to open the season. And yet that Tulsa, even at Tulsa and Arkansas, those should be games. Oklahoma State has shown that it elevated itself last year. It should win all 3 non-conference games.
Yeah, the Cowboys should be 3-0, but all 3 are at least interesting, right?
Yeah,
all 3 of them, you sort of wake up and say, no, we ought to win, but they're all but games. South Dakota State's 2-time defending champion, 1AA. Those kinds of teams, North Dakota State before them, have a history of playing tough against Big 12 type opponents. We've seen North Dakota State beat Kansas State and Bill Snyder. That's the game where Bill Snyder famously wrote a congratulatory letter to Carson Wentz after North Dakota State came in and beat the Wildcats. So that potentially they could be tough. In this age of the portal where guys can leave pretty easy, I would assume South Dakota's not going to be as stout as, say, 2017 North Dakota State, but you never know.
Yeah.
Going to Tulsa shouldn't even be a road game for OSU. Cowboy fans should be throughout the stadium, but you never know when you go on the road. OSU historically has had trouble at Tulsa. They had a quite a few game losing streak in Tulsa's old Skelly Stadium. In recent years when they played, Cowboys have been dominant, and they should win that one. But it's still, in theory, a road game. And then Arkansas is an SEC team. Rebuilding, not projected to be very good, so that should be a win too. So Cowboys should get to 3, but it's not automatic.
Yeah, and the thing that I tend to agree that 3-0 is where they will start. but they've had some slow starts. Even some really good teams have had slow starts. We saw it a year ago when they were trying to figure out their offensive personnel. We saw it the year that they played for a Big 12 title. So we've seen good OSU teams have slow starts. These are the type of opponents a slow start could mean a loss like it did a year ago to South Alabama. Now, difference this year, unlike last year, they know who their quarterback is. They know who their best tailback is. They've got an offensive line that is solidified and returning. And, Barry, you mentioned the transfer portal, how it can, transform teams. But Oklahoma State, after a year after they were transformed in a takeaway sort of sense, players leaving and them having to backfill and figure out who could step into the void, they know a lot of those answers coming into next season. They've got experienced guys. They've got some talented guys. So I like their chances in this portal era to have a team that wasn't beset by a bunch of transfers. They're keeping a lot of their really good players. So I think that bodes well for them in non-conference play. So I'm with you. I think OSU wins all three. I think they start the season 3-0. But then they've got these two whammies to start the Big 12 play. Utah comes to Stillwater, and then the Cowboys head to K-State, two other teams that are among the expected contenders in the Big 12. Are those the biggest barriers for Oklahoma State getting over that Vegas hump? Or what do you see, sort of like we were talking about with OU? What are the OSU must-wins to get to 8 or more wins next year?
Well, probably so. It's one of the cool things about the Big 12 schedule is a lot of front-loaded games. We got some early season games matching in my mind, is like 5 contenders. When you look at KU, K-State, OSU, Arizona, Utah, bunch of those teams match up against each other in the first 2 or 3 weeks of conference play. So for OSU, that's it. Those 2 games, K-State, Utah. And then take your chances from there. And, the Cowboys can navigate the rest of it. Now, the beauty of the Big 12, then and now, past and present, is its newfound parity. You never know what's going to happen.
Right.
You don't know if playing, a 4-6 Baylor is going to be any easier than playing an 8-2 Utah. You just don't know because things are so wild. But from what we know now, that's the key. That's the key. If you get the leap on some of those fellow contenders, a good season ensues. I'm intrigued by the low number, though. When you look at the Big 12 over/under numbers,
yeah,
OSU is tied for 7th.
Yeah, it was crazy to look at that, Barry.
Yeah, Utah 9.5, K-State 9.5, Arizona, Kansas, Tech, UCF all 8.5.
Yeah.
Before you get into the 7.5 crowd of OSU, ISU, and TCU.
Right.
Now, historically, Vegas has undervalued OSU.
Yeah.
On the over/under totals during the week with point spreads. I tend to think that's because Oklahoma State fan base is probably not a terribly energetic betting crowd. They probably don't do a lot of stuff on the betting lines, and no amount of stuff really gets them going. So most teams are inflated by their own fans, Vegas tendencies. So that's one reason why OSU is generally underrated. But I don't see the justification for having OSU down below Kansas State, down below Arizona, down below Tech and UCF.
Yeah.
So I don't understand.
Right. The Tech and UCF to me were big surprises to be ahead of Oklahoma State. I don't think that'll happen in the final Big 12 standings. I think Oklahoma State will be better than both of those teams. Now, both those teams could be, among the teams that at the end of next season we're saying, hey, there's a team we didn't expect to be as good this year, and maybe they step into, that parity that we've seen in the Big 12. But, to me, what you just said about OSU is also borne out in some of these other teams. I mean, Kansas they don't have to play a bunch of these other contenders. They probably have, among the contending teams, at least the contending teams in the minds of people in Big 12 country, they don't have a ton of those opponents. They don't have Oklahoma State, for example. So Kansas' schedule looks to be set up really well for the Jayhawks to be up towards the top of the standings, but you don't see them ahead of Utah, K-State. Now, I'm not saying that K-State deserves a lower number or Utah, but it just feels like that perception aspect. I mean, again, it is what the odds makers think will play well with the betting public. So it makes sense that, if you're a bettor, on the East Coast and you see Kansas at 8.5, you might think, Kansas football, I'm taking the under on that. And you might not look and realize that they have had a rebirth, that they don't have a schedule that could hold them back. So I think some of that is probably at play because, frankly, I go back to when we first saw the Big 12 schedule for Oklahoma State. I go back to some of what I thought at that point. They did get some of these teams that you don't really know how they're going to fall. A Tech, for example, a West Virginia. They got those teams at home. Yes, they've got to go to BYU. Yes, they've got to go to Colorado. Yes, they've got to go to K-State. But they got some teams that you might say, maybe they could jump up. They've got good coaching or they've got some players coming back. Teams that always maybe are kind of in that middle mix of things. Oklahoma State gets them in Stillwater. I think that bodes well for Oklahoma State to get over that 7.5 game mark and maybe well over, Barry. I don't know what I'd pick right now, but I think I would take the over without much problem at all.
Oh yeah, I would too. I mean, I would predict OSU at least 9-3 in the regular season. I think did we count? I think it's 18 starters returning in the portal age, which is just madness. I mean, that doesn't happen. You got your quarterback back. You got Ollie Gordon back. You got your coaching staff back. Continuity still matters. And that's one of the reasons people like Utah so much is because Kyle Whittingham has been there, 3 weeks longer than Gundy's been head coach. They're the standard bearers along with Kirk Ferentz up at Iowa in terms of longevity. So I like this Cowboys season prospects. I think the Cowboys are going to be Big 12 challengers. I think they very well could find themselves in Arlington. And I won't be betting any money, but if I did, I would jump all over the over on the Oklahoma State Cowboys.
Okay, so we're both taking over 7.5 for OSU. What about OU? If you're betting the Sooners, are you taking over 7.5 or are you going under?
I'm going to go over. When it was 6.5, I'd take the way over. At 7.5, I'll still take the over. I do think we talked about it, but I think the 4 plus South Carolina plus Auburn, I think those are going to be 6. Get to 6 pretty easy. And then I think, winning at Missouri, winning at Ole Miss, even beating Alabama and Norman, I think is going to be doable. Don't know if it'll happen, but I think it's doable. I think ding dong, the witch is dead. So that's you don't tremble in fear anymore at Alabama.
Yeah. And what about this question, Barry? With both these teams setting at 7-5, maybe this is sort of a fear factor measure. Is it more likely that both teams get over 7-5 or both teams fall on the under?
Oh, I think it's more likely they go over because I'd be stunned if OSU didn't go over.
Yeah.
I'm much more confident in OSU than OU getting over the 7.5, but I don't. The Cowboys can surprise you. They had the great 21 season. Then they're 6-1, ranked 9th in 22, and the bottom falls out, and they're not any good for the next calendar year, really, or 11 months. But outside of that, they've played pretty good football for most of the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I think OSU is going to go over. And so if we're going to parlay it, I think the Sooners caught in their wake and go with them.
Yeah. I don't know if I care much about the money put on any of this. I just want to know, is the misery index high next season? And I think people are going to be excited because of the changing conferences, the changing opponents, the landscape's going to look different. I know we're all bummed about, I say all. You and I are bummed about Bedlam being over, but I think a lot of other people are too. So there's that downer. But I don't think that these two teams are destined for, bad seasons. And I think, frankly, they could both be, double-digit win type of season. So misery index, I'm saying it's low, Barry.
Hey, I'm ready for let's go 10-2 Sooners, 11-2 Cowboys, who lose the Big 12 title game. Committee ranks them 8 and 9. We can have Bedlam in the playoff. You wrote about this, I think, last November. Have Bedlam in the playoff, and the committee can decide whether it's Norman or Stillwater.
That'd be awesome. I'm all for that. And here we sit in February, and we're all excited about college football season. Good news, it'll be here before we know it. But that's all the time we've got this week. We got all sorts of football content. Yes, football content at selloutcrowd.com. You can find our columns, videos, and podcasts there, as well as barrytrammell.com and jenny-carlson.com. If you want our content sent straight to your inbox, it's easy. Just go to selloutcrowd.com and opt into our newsletters. If this happens to be your first time hearing or watching us, be sure to subscribe to our show on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a review. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.